if you're a business owner, make sure you're running a business you like. Like life is too short, especially when you're an owner, to hate what you're doing. Running an agency is never going to be easy, but it doesn't have to be so hard.
And we're back. This is Neal Isaacs, the Raleigh Business Broker, with another interview section here. Super excited to have Karl Sakas on the program today. Karl, I have known for 20 years, Karl? We go way back.
It's been a long time, yes.
It's been a long time. Back when I was a marketing guy, I met Karl when he was leading the Triangle AMA, and I've seen him running his agency for over a decade now. And I was really excited to have this conversation with Karl, just because as an intermediary, we're looking at businesses and from a sellability factor. And we look at all different types of niches. And Karl's in the agency niche, which is a super fun niche. And he advises agencies, whether they want to run a lifestyle business or have a multi-million-dollar exit. Karl's your man to do that. So I'm excited to have a deep dive with Karl. Karl, give yourself an introduction.
Neal, thank you. I mean, you've covered it really well. In my work, I help agency owners work less and earn more while rewarding their best team members, whether they're looking to sell, as many of my clients are, or if they want to keep running the business for the foreseeable future, although they'll probably want to sell at some point in the future. I draw on my background in agency operations. As you mentioned, we met through AMA Triangle, the American Marketing Association. I've been an agency PM. I've been a director of client services, director of operations. And over the past, at this point, coming up on 12 years, I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of agencies on every inhabited continent around that work less, earn more.
On a personal level, I've known you for a long time. I know you've got some hobbies outside of marketing as well. Can you touch on any of that?
Yes. So art, travel, cocktails, trains. I have an unusual volunteer activity. I volunteer as a bartender on an antique train.
Nice.
Been doing that for a number of years. It's like something out of an old movie. Beds flip down from the ceiling, making cocktails to order. It's called the Dover Harbor. It's like a 90-foot long rolling bed and breakfast at the end of an Amtrak train.
Wow, that's awesome. I love that about you, and I love your professionalism. The way that you advise clients reminds me of our approach at my firm about how we want to be an advocate, and especially as we're reviewing your LinkedIn bio and that language about lifestyle versus exit opportunity. I just recently became a certified exit planning advisor, a CEPA, and that's kind of one of the first filters we look for in a business owner. Nothing wrong with running a lifestyle business as long as you're aware that you may be limiting your exit options, right?
Yes.
So I would imagine that's some more of the paradigm or the lens that you look through when you're advising clients.
For sure. That's one of the first questions I ask. In fact, during the sales and vetting process, do you lean toward running a lifestyle agency, keep it, run it highly profitable, or do you lean more toward what I would call an equity agency where you want an exit event? And most people are somewhere in the middle. But as you said, if you lean fully toward lifestyle, that can be a great match while you run the business. It may limit some of your options in the future.
Yeah, in the marketing agency business, I mean, you're not selling widgets, you're selling services. So innately, it's high margin from the beginning. And if you're doing it all, you're probably keeping the majority of it, right?
Well, it's hopefully a high margin.
Right.
Agencies often are sending about half of the revenue out the door. This would be after subtracting advertising and other pass-through expenses of the gross income. Often about half is going out the door to labor, but you can still get 20 to 30% net profit margins if you do it right. Although I'll have people come to me saying they're at, say, 10%. All right, let's get that 20 and then hopefully beyond. So yes, it can be very profitable if you're doing it right.
Yeah, so that's kind of an introduction to benchmarking there. What are your margins and what are your peers' margins, and why are your margins not in line with your peers?
Yes.
Okay. Well, let's get into a little bit. So we're talking about agencies, we're talking about saleability. Let's talk about some of the factors that agency buyers may be looking for. I've worked with some marketing agencies want to sell, and our first question is, tell me how deep the bench of customers are. So let's start there, like kind of customer concentration issues. Well, how does that play into saleability of a marketing agency?
You're looking for a kind of a Goldilocks and the Three Bears situation. Not too
Okay.
many clients, not too few. Generally, I'm a fan of having 10 to 20 active clients. You can have more than that. Say if you have a pod structure, kind of mini agencies within the agency, you can go much higher in terms of client count. But another way to look at it would be client concentration and what I would call client dilution. That
Mhm.
is, if you have a client concentration that is 20% more or more of your revenue, buyers are potentially going to want to discount the price they pay, or perhaps a lower EBITDA multiple, for
Yeah.
instance.
Yeah.
Because if you lose that client, suddenly a lot of the revenue and then the profits go away. So ideally, any one client is less than 20%. That would be
Yeah.
client concentration. You also want to be careful about client dilution, which is the opposite. I worked with an agency a number of years ago that had about 80 clients. They wanted to get above 100, which they had had in the past. And I was
Yeah.
like, why? And he's like, well, I'll make more money. And I said, what if you could make more money with 50 clients or 40 or
Yeah.
30? And he's like, well, I don't know. More seems better. As I dug in his particular example, one of his clients had cut their retainer and the accounting department updated the invoices, but no one told the delivery team. And for 2 months, the agency at the time was seeking to charge 125 an hour, which would be
Right.
just kind of low then, definitely too low now.
Mhm.
They were averaging, for my calculation, $5 an hour.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you have a lot of clients, make sure you're delivering profitably, make sure clients are getting enough attention, but also not too much attention. It's really
Yeah.
a balancing act.
And something on this issue of customer concentration, you kind of opened my eyes to, and I've seen it with our own clients, is that it's easier to run an agency where you have fewer clients because you don't
Yeah.
have to. It's streamlined, right? And we've sold businesses with very few clients, and they're like, I could add more, but we work so well together, and then I have to learn new customers, and so I get that, and I'm sure there's some efficiency in that, but it's a kind of a risk reward. So I like your 80, your 20% modality there. That makes a lot of sense. What about on the other side? You mentioned these agencies, some of the money's not going out the door to vendors. What
Yep.
about vendor concentration? Like, what if you have all your eggs in one basket, or is there the same type of challenges there with vendor concentration?
That can be a challenge too. I worked with an agency about 8 years ago, and the owner was running the business, had a full-time project manager, and then everyone else was a contractor. And notably, the owner was outsourcing to another firm to provide emergency support.
Mhm.
The agency focused on e-commerce development. And so, if an e-commerce site is down, that's costing them hundreds, thousands, millions of dollars, depending on the particulars. And
Yeah.
so they had a 24/7 urgent support line. The problem was that the support line was run by the outsourced company, which meant when the owner was considering replacing them, they had to come up with a whole new emergency support process because they were overly dependent on that outsourced provider for the whole
Yes.
structure. So, ideally, you're running the systems internally, and your outsourced partners are going from there. When it comes to outsourcing, even if you're happy with firms you're working with, I would still keep an eye out for
Yeah.
what else is out there. For clients who do significant over outsourcing overseas, for instance, when they have a great partner, they've often gone through 3 or 4 to get there, and things can always deteriorate. So,
Yes.
be careful about putting too much of your work or, through any one firm.
Outsourcing overseas is a whole nother topic that I'm going to steer us away from, because I
Yeah.
would imagine, especially in your world, there's a lot of that. In my world, the virtual assistants are pretty popular, but I'm sure in the marketing realm, it goes on and on and on. So that's a
It
topic
can,
for another
yeah.
day. To me, all this comes down to owner dependence, and back to I was saying, you could do it all yourself and keep most of the margin,
Yeah.
but that is a lifestyle business, and that may be an unsustainable lifestyle. So, I mean, how do you approach owner dependence when you're advising owners of agencies?
In my Work Less, Earn More book, I talk about 4 stages of day-to-day owner involvement.
Yeah.
Stage 1 is you are mandatory. That is, just like it sounds. You can never get away. Most of the work is going through you, certainly all the client relationships. You can't really step away for lunch without potentially something going wrong. And that's especially so if you're in stage 1, you're mandatory, and you've built up your agency. If it's you and a few people, you're probably going to be mandatory. If you've got 10 or 20 or 50 team members and you're still mandatory, that's not good. Ideally, you move to stage 2 from there. At that point, you are necessary. You're able to get away for a few days. Your team's taking care of things. They might be making a lot of mistakes that you have to clean up, but it's a bit better in stage 2, necessary.
Mhm.
Most agencies will want to move to at least stage 3, which is where you are needed but not necessary. You
Yeah.
can go on vacation for a week or two. Your team's taking care of things. You're not going to disappear for an entire year, for
Mhm.
instance, but you can get away. And if you're leaning toward running a lifestyle agency, stage 3 can be a good place to be. But a lot of the clients I work with want to pursue what I call stage 4, which is to make themselves optional.
Mhm.
When you are optional, you are just that. You don't have to do everything. There may be some things you choose to do, but that's because you enjoy them, not because you are mandatory in doing them. And most people are going to be in multiple stages at once. Maybe, for instance, if you've delegated initial sales screening, maybe
Yeah.
you're optional for the initial screening when an inquiry comes in, but maybe you're still necessary as the closer. So you can be in different places at once, but as people are thinking about that, you might want to consider which stages are you in now in different areas of your business.
An interesting asset on this topic is partnerships. And
Mhm.
I love how you broke it down from the stage 1 to 4, but I've met business owners who are partners, and one may be at stage 4 and one's at stage 1.
Yep.
And the stage 1 guy or gal is like, I don't want to work so hard. And the stage 4 guy or gal is like, I think I'm pretty comfortable. Why change anything?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, part of what I'll ask new clients when I do my agency growth diagnostic, I'll ask, what do you love doing every day?
Yeah.
What do you hate doing every day? And then there's anything where you're okay doing it. You don't love
Yeah.
it, but you're okay to keep doing it. I worked with a client in Belgium where 2 owners, neither of them wanted to do sales. And I'm
Mhm.
like, "That's okay, but someone's gonna have to do sales," and then we were able to talk
Yeah.
about that. So make
Yeah.
sure, regardless of the stages, make sure things are getting covered.
Yeah, and that's another thing that's amazing about your practice is I saw you've worked in 26 countries. I mean, you're seeing you take the American culture and say, well, maybe that doesn't matter if we're talking to a client in Belgium. So I think that's fascinating that you work with people all over the world. But as a
Yeah.
specialist, that's something you can do. You know the core of how agencies should work. I would imagine it works similarly in different countries.
Ultimately, there are more similarities than not. If you're running an
Yeah.
agency, you wanna work with good clients, a great team, doing work you're proud of, running a
Yeah.
profitable business. There are for sure geographic differences, but
Yeah.
more similarities than not.
Well, speaking of selling agencies, and you may
Yeah.
not know this since you're so deep into your field, but how do you think that marketing agencies are different than other businesses in regards to just operations or options for exit? How are they unique?
They're complicated. One of
Yeah.
like any services business, say a plumbing firm,
Yeah.
agencies are highly dependent on people to fulfill the work. It's not running a factory. The difference,
Mhm.
though, is that clients of marketing agencies versus, say, a plumbing firm are kind of picky. So imagine a chief marketing officer hires a plumber to deal with a problem at their house. Maybe it's installing a new dishwasher, maybe something is leaking, maybe this or that. It's pretty clear if the plumber did the job right or not. The leak
Yeah.
has stopped, a
Yeah.
new appliance is installed, what have you. But if that same CMO hires an agency, now it's suddenly a question of, well, is the work good enough? Is it
Yeah.
even done? There's a
Yeah.
really tangible nature, and it's very subjective. Part of the
Yeah.
challenge is you don't know if marketing worked or not until later.
Yeah, that's true. The subjective, I think, is the key word there. Is it's
Yes.
there's an art to it, right? And people interpret. art differently. People like different types of art. And, I kind of analogize it towards it in my world. Like they say, a jewelry store or a furniture
Mm,
store is one of the hardest things to sell because it's all inventory and the next owner may just not like that type of inventory.
right.
And, and so it may be very valuable to one owner, but how is it when someone builds a brand, an agency, and they're known for a certain look or specialty? Is there a matchmaking piece? And I know you're more focused on running of the agency, but you've seen
Yeah,
people go
yeah.
through exits. Couldn't a marketing agency be perfect, but be limiting its buyers by the specific style or philosophy that they follow?
Potentially, yes,
You know,
yes. For instance, if they work only with small local businesses and they're
Mhm.
sort of churning out templatized websites
Yeah,
or kind of very kind of copy and paste sorts of things, that isn't going to be appealing to an agency that's doing highly custom work.
yeah,
And vice versa, so if you're looking to buy a business, you need to make sure that it's aligned around their philosophy and also around the internal culture.
yeah.
Is it going to be a match or is it going to be a culture clash?
Yeah. Yeah. Culture is something that's universal with all businesses, but I would imagine in agencies more so than ever. Well, let's dig in a little bit more into the product and service nature because
Yeah,
you mentioned it. I mean, you could have a website company and we build $10,000 websites. We're the best in the business. We outsource everything to India and we just crank them out. And that's different. You're kind of making donuts at that point. That's different
yeah,
than we have a monthly retainer and I'm kind of making this up as I go,
sure,
but
yeah.
people hire us every month because of the unique skill sets that we have and we're deeply embedded in their marketing plans. That's Neal's limited the little bit of marketing experience I've had. That's kind of how I see the different approaches in kind of the short term versus the long term type of thing. But tell me from your perspective, what role does the types of services and products, how does that feed into agencies' growth and options for exit?
You've captured an important thing, which is around the mix of recurring revenue versus more project-based revenue.
Yeah.
Generally, in my work, if an agency is more project-oriented, they're looking for my help on growing retainers. For
Yeah.
instance, I had a client in Florida a few years ago, and one of the things they were struggling with was they were only getting about 10% of recurring revenue from retainers. And they had retainer based services, they just were struggling to get them out to clients.
Hmm.
And as part of my process, I said, you want to make sure that everyone on your team is talking about the value of retainers throughout the client relationship in marketing and sales, during kickoff, during delivery, and so on.
Yeah.
So the client is pre-sold on the value of the retainer. And obviously not if the client wouldn't benefit from it, but ultimately, I worked with the client for about 6 months. They continued to follow my advice, and within a year, they'd gone from 10% retainers to annualized 90% retainers. That's a
Yeah.
big jump, but ultimately, the higher the retainer revenue, whether that's a 12-month retainer or lately there's been pressure toward more like 6-month retainers, that's going to help likely on the valuation because
Yeah.
the revenue is more locked in.
Yeah. Yeah. You went right to retainers, which I think is strong because I think a lot of people confuse recurring revenue with reoccurring revenue. And the
Mm,
big difference is the retainer.
yeah,
Recurring, it's fine to say this customer shopped with us forever and they're likely to come back the next time. But if they've have a retainer on the line, then there's a different in a contract with teeth in it. That's a different
yes.
customer.
And,
Yeah.
and, and ideally, and I'm not a lawyer, but ideally your client contracts are assignable so that
Right.
if you want to do an asset sale, you could assign it to the new entity versus only having the stock sale option. But talk to the right people on that. Just something to consider if you're updating your contracts about assignability.
So we've gotten into some good stuff here. We talked about concentration and how it could weaken or maybe even make a business more efficient if done properly. We talked a little bit about how agencies are different, and now we're talking about it's that owner that's maybe got some recurring revenue, and maybe they do
Yeah.
want to have their options for exit. So let's talk about who could buy a marketing agency? What do the buyers look like? And what the seller, the business agency owner may be looking for when they sell their business.
Maybe start with the who buys agencies, and then we can
Yeah.
take a look at the seller. So, there are a number of categories of people or entities who will buy agencies. Some
Mhm.
are individual investors who are looking to get into the industry. Maybe they've been an in-house marketer and they want their own thing, but they'd rather not start from scratch. That's an
Mhm.
option. It could be another agency that's looking to add, say, geographic coverage. Maybe they want their office in New York or in London or in the Bay Area. Maybe it's an agency that's looking to add services. For instance, maybe they do project-based work like websites or video production, and you have a lot of recurring revenue, and they want to get your recurring services, including your team's help, on
Yeah.
delivering those, and they can cross-sell. That's a possibility. Sometimes agencies are selling to private equity firms or other investment firms, or holding companies. Traditionally, they're the big agency holding companies like WPP, Omnicom, and things like that. There are also more specialized holding companies like Tiny, for instance,
Okay.
which is sort of the framed as the Berkshire Hathaway of the internet. So there are a number of options. You also might choose to sell to one of your current employees. That
Uh-huh.
can be risky, right? You want to make sure they're going to be a match. You want to make sure that they can get an SBA loan, for instance, and also that they have the cash to make the down payment
Yeah.
and then run the business from there. But those are some general categories of who might buy an agency.
I want to revisit employees, but another one is we've had agencies for sale. And we've had larger firms that don't have agency experience, but they're just tired of hiring agencies and they want to bring an agency in house. And the idea is like they could do our stuff and then they could continue to do the other client stuff. And if they have the talent,
Yes.
then we don't need to know about marketing. What's your thought on that approach?
That can be a good option, and one of
Yeah.
the benefits there is that if your agency's finances haven't been great over the past few years, but say
Mhm.
you have a really big client who loves the work you do, they might ask, "Could we bring you over to our team?" and all. And in that case, they're more interested in what you're capable of doing and less focused on your EBITDA
Yeah.
because they just want your team and they
Yeah.
want you. I helped a client do that about a decade ago where, finances were so-so, had a
Mhm.
client, his client made an offer, helped them get a bit more money. And in that case, I think he was contracted to stay for 2 years. He actually stayed for about 4 because he loved working at the new company. He loved
Yeah.
not being in charge of everything
Yeah.
anymore. That can be a good match. Ideally, the acquirer speaks first, right? If you go to a client and say you're thinking of selling, that can spook them. Whereas if they're like, "Hey, we love working with you. Would you consider selling to us?" That's a better spot to be in.
Yeah. Yeah. We always worry representing primarily owners
Yeah.
about letting the word out that somebody wants to sell. And you mentioned employees buying the agency, and I think similar to law firms, this is kind of a natural evolution of a firm partners. It's a partner type model oftentimes, and so
Yeah.
it makes sense for people to start on the ground floor and work their way up. I, I would imagine you see a lot of that, and I would imagine that helps with culture as well because they already know the culture.
Exactly, and they also, if you're selling to an internal buyer, like a
Yeah,
longtime employee, they probably are going to be more forgiving of problems than an
yeah,
external buyer because they're like, "Well, okay, this is normal, this is fine."
yeah,
They likely aren't going to have quite as painful a due diligence process either. Like, they're still going
absolutely. Yeah,
to be things, but, if they've worked for you for years and they're thinking of buying, they're going to trust you more than an outside party that has no experience with you.
yeah,
And it tends to close faster. The valuation may not be as high, but I mean, something to
yeah,
consider, you could sell for, say, 3 million and it goes fast and it's, a significant chunk up front.
mhm,
Or, you could sell for 5 million, but maybe it drags out forever. Maybe there are lots of earnout components and things like that. You may not get that
yeah.
full 5 million.
That's almost the opposite of that hypothetical that I just proposed of the giant company that doesn't know about marketing absorbing a marketing company versus the internal stakeholder that does know a lot about marketing, but maybe doesn't have the funds. But the second example, you can solve that with an SBA loan. There's
That
financing vehicles to solve the money piece.
for
So,
sure.
and that kind of ties into if an owner had two options, what goes into their choice, like what they want their business to look like, even though their chapter's over. I'm sure, and you would know this better than anyone from talking to these owners, they have certain predilections and wishes for their agency, especially if it has their name on it after they're gone. So can you talk to me a little bit about what agency owners think about regarding legacy of their business?
Absolutely. If your goal is to get a really high price, a private equity firm might be a good option to sell to. If
Yeah.
you want to continue the legacy of the agency and provide for your team, don't sell to a private equity firm because they're focused on flipping the business within a period of time, and
Yeah.
they don't have that kind of loyalty. So, I think about if you're looking to sell your agency or any business, what is your ideal future for yourself and for the business? I have a tool that I develop for myself and then I use with my clients that I call an advanced retrospective. In the advanced retrospective, you write about the future as if it's already happened. So if I have a client, I do that every year. I'll write about, in January, it's December 31st of this year.
Love
It's a
that.
great
Yeah.
day because, kind of write about it.
Yeah.
You can also do it kind of further out. If you are stuck between two major decisions, for instance, sell internally versus sell externally,
Mhm.
write an advanced retrospective for each scenario.
Yeah.
It's, 3 years from now, I sold internally. I'm so glad I did because,
Yeah.
and same time, 3 years from now, I sold externally and I'm so glad because
Yeah.
you're probably going to enjoy writing one of those a lot more.
Yeah.
And that can help you make the decision about which option to pursue.
I love that exercise. I've done it before. It's surprising, even when you think about if you put enough time in between now and when your goals are, how much you can accomplish.
Yeah.
And when I did it before, I was like, I should have asked for more because I accomplished all of this. And it's a fun exercise, and that's a great tool that you use. Well,
You,
you've
you
mentioned
know,
private equity a couple times. Can you share a little bit about what you're seeing for private equity's appetite in the agency space these days?
it definitely fluctuates. There are some firms that specialize in buying agencies. I mentioned Tiny, which is more of a holding company model. Venture Capital is another that's more PE oriented. Some of it comes down to, are you focused on an industry that's hot right now? For
Mhm.
instance, tech firms have had their ups and downs. Early 2023, a lot of tech firms were cutting back on spending. So tech
Yeah,
oriented agencies were struggling. On the other hand, if you're focused on AI,
yeah,
hot, hot market, will that be true forever? I don't know. I mean, crypto was super hot for a while, then it
yeah,
sort of went down and now it's coming back up again. There's a
yeah,
cyclicality there. And I
yeah,
think one of the key things is, build relationships with brokers to know what's going on in the market
yeah,
and to sort out, like, is now the opening, right? If you're like, maybe I want to sell, if you're seeing trends going down, you may want to
yeah,
sell sooner than later. Though if there is an earnout involved, you're going to participate in whatever is going up or down.
yeah, yeah. And earnouts are something I'd love to get into. Maybe if we have a little time at the end, because that's something
Sure.
I think a lot of owners don't know, understand in the beginning, but it's an important part of just understanding how that works.
Yeah.
And my take on private equity is I know they're rolling up accounting firms right now. I've talked to some
Mhm.
accounting firm agencies that are seeing it, and they're looking for 500,000, 750,000 of EBITDA, and
Mhm.
the majority of smaller agencies are not going to be big enough.
Exactly. I mean, as you've probably seen, there's sort of a 1 million EBITDA target as sort of a magic number.
Yeah,
Uh, and then if you're at, whether it's 10 million in revenue or even 10 million in EBITDA, then things become even more attractive. But, that also, you want to run a profitable business.
Yeah.
That's good regardless of your goals, but you also don't want to run yourself ragged
Sure.
in doing it, because hopefully you'll sell, but you may not, or you may not get the offer that you want, and things like that. If you're a
Yeah.
business owner, make sure you're running a business you like. Like,
Yeah.
life is too short, especially when you're an owner, to
Yeah.
hate what you're doing.
I love that. And then this is back to the exit planning. And we, one of our things we say, it's like the number one rule of Fight Club is you don't talk about Fight Club, right?
Yeah.
The number one rule of selling a business, any business, is you just act like you're not selling the business. So what you
Yeah.
say falls right in line with that. On this topic of someone buying your business, whether it's private equity or something else, and culture being a part of it. I know you see a lot of businesses that are pretty niche, and the buyer pool is kind of limited. I'm wondering if you have any stories about niche agencies that just couldn't find, just they were so dialed into one thing, their options for buyers were limited. Have you ever seen that before?
Yeah, I've spoken at the HubSpot Inbound conference a number of times, and at one of my first appearances back in 2015, I met an agency owner who was focused on a very narrow niche within sustainable energy. I won't be more specific than that, but it was very
Sure.
niche. And he mentioned that in terms of his sales efforts, there are maybe 5 companies that would buy, and then there may be some smaller ones and things like that. My guess is, if and when he wanted to sell, there also might have been a somewhat limited set of people that wanted to buy.
Yeah.
Now, maybe he could sell to someone who's focused on sustainable energy and they're working to build their services, but he would probably have to expand his business beyond his current focus.
Mhm.
Um, so that's a risk. But then again, if you love the industry, that is more fun than working
Yeah.
with your clients you don't like. Sometimes people ask, well, Carl, what's the most lucrative agency market? There are a few options. I would say that clients that I work with law firms, so like legal marketing. It tends to pay well. They tend to stay around. You can be chasing after them for sign-offs, right? Because if they can be billing $800 an hour, they're not going to want to take the time to talk with you about their latest marketing program.
Sure.
But you have to like lawyers.
Yeah.
Lawyers
Yeah.
have very low job satisfaction. Do you
Uh-huh.
want to work with clients who really dislike their work? You'll have to decide.
Sure. Yeah. So the riches are in the niches, but then you may be limiting your options there. So it's back to the concentration issue. There's an appropriate amount of dialing down
Yes.
there. And back to, if you run a lifestyle agency and you have no intentions of selling, maybe it's fine to really, really niche down and just make as much as you can that way.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, if you're in a situation where you don't really want to sell, that can be okay as long as you're making enough money now to
Yeah.
fund your retirement and to fund other expenses.
Yeah.
But if you're running a lifestyle agency, don't underpay yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
You need
Again, we're speaking the
Yeah,
same language. And people may find it strange as an intermediary, but I'll tell people you don't have to sell. You can make money along the way.
yeah,
Sometimes people, to your point, pay yourself along the way because there's no exit guaranteed. You know, you're
yes,
you're more likely to pay yourself next month than you can control that, maybe more so than your exit, unless you do a lot of long-term planning. So
yes.
plan accordingly. Well, I got one more kind of topic here, and then I'm going to kind of round the bases a little bit. And this topic, so we're kind of getting to the end of this thing. Let's say you got that owner, they've converted from a lifestyle agency to something that's sellable, and they're at that stage where they want to do something else. Typically with my clients, it's family, retirement, health, relocation. So they're like, okay, I'm ready to sell this business. So Carl, tell me a little bit about, what's involved. How long does it take? What can owners, is it, here's the keys. That's where the coffee machine is. I'll see you later. I'm out the door. Is it a little bit more involved in that? Let's walk through how these deals unfold.
It's usually going to be a little more involved than, here are the keys and there's the coffee maker. There is one particular situation where the owner can exit and stop working in the business faster, which is to sell to someone who is running a search fund. This is usually someone with an elite MBA, like they just graduated from Harvard or University of Chicago, and they are looking to buy a business and become the CEO of that business. They probably have some prior experience. Like I talked to someone who grew up in her family business. She'd worked for Procter and Gamble, got a high level MBA, and was looking now to buy a business. So she was searching for a couple of years. People were funding her lifestyle expenses during that time. And then she was going to bring in an institutional investor to fund the actual acquisition. In that case, she wants to take over as CEO as soon as possible. And once
Yeah.
you're out the door, maybe you're still in an advisory role, but
Yeah.
more often you're going to be involved for 2 to 3 years. This is all negotiable. Obviously, you want to be involved less, and the owner may want you involved more. And over that time, and you can structure this, maybe you spend the first year focused on transition support, continuing on business development, do thought leadership. Maybe year two, maybe you're working part-time and you're doing more thought leadership. Maybe you are, certainly referring any leads, but someone else closes the leads. Maybe year three, you're down to being sort of on call. Maybe you refer leads and maybe you get a commission for them now, something like that. It's all negotiable. But, if you want to walk out the door, you should be starting this whole process 2 to 3 years ago, or realize that it's going to take some time. I read about a staffing firm in the Triangle that had been in business for like 20 years, and the owners were ready to sell. Their kids didn't want to take over. And I guess the owners realized that they would have to stick around and there'd be an earnout, and they just shut the business down instead of selling. It's like, I wish they had started this a couple years ago. And my estimate,
That's an option, but you raise a valid point. Maybe closing the doors is fine for you, but what about your team? What about their livelihood? That's something to think about as well. So, so owners maybe think about sticking around for a few years after the sale. And I can tell you, it's going to the average deal takes 7, 9, 12 months for legitimate sized deals. So maybe add some extra time onto that. This could take a decade. If you're in a lifestyle business and you want to walk away from it, you may have to make a lot of changes and just plan for it to take a while.
Potentially. I got an inquiry recently from an owner who has just founded a business after experiencing a lot of agencies, big brands and all. And currently his agency financials are in a spreadsheet. He's not looking to sell right now, but you need to be in accounting software, for instance, if you're
that's definitely universal for all businesses. Business buyers, you can have the best culture in the world, but if your books aren't good, people you won't get past financial diligence. Well, I'm an agency owner theoretically, and I just sold my business. And so can I go right back to work doing more agency stuff? Cause that's all I know how to do. And I really love doing it. Can I just start competing with the guy that just bought my business?
If the buyer is smart, they will have had you sign a non-compete.
Well, that's not fair, Carl. That's just all I know to do.
It's all negotiable. Maybe they're like, we'll pay you, $1 million without a non-compete, or we'll pay you $5 million with a non-compete.
Yeah.
I take the $5 million with the non-compete, depending on the particulars. Non-competes usually are not being enforced these days for employees, but they can be for the owner, right? This is sort of the exiting owner, different situation. I'll see people do things like start a business in a different field, maybe take some time off. I mean, there's only so much golf you can play, but that's an option. Usually I'll see non-competes in the neighborhood of, say, 2 years. This is all negotiable, right?
Yeah.
You can get a 1 year, that's a great deal. If they want a 10-year, that's probably too much. I mean, it depends on how much you're getting paid. If you're getting paid $100 million and it's a 10-year non-compete, I mean, you don't need to work again anyway. So,
with marketing, there's often not geographical constraints. If it's a retail shop, we can say you can't compete within 5 miles from here. But if your reach is the internet, then it could be a larger footprint there.
This also may be an opportunity for a career change. For instance, I put together my Control and Maximize Your Agency Exit training and,
Mhm.
and have created a discount code for your listeners. One of the panelists, we ended up have 9 speakers, including a panel of sellers and buyers. One of the
Yeah.
sellers talked about she'd always wanted to do a career change and she couldn't while she was running her agency.
Yeah.
Part of her exit included moving into corporate venture development, which is
Yeah.
something she's really enjoying. So if you've been wanting to change careers, this could be the perfect opportunity. Then the non-compete likely wouldn't apply.
Yeah. So it's going to take longer than owners might think. They
Yes.
have to think about their identity. I would imagine your clients know themselves as agency owners and may not know themselves in any other identity. So it can be a real emotional piece there, just realizing what am I going to do if I don't do this? And
You,
then there's
yeah.
that notion of you mentioned this earnout thing. Like, you mean I don't get all my cash at closing? Like, and maybe I'm not even guaranteed all my cash. So let's peel that earnout on you just a little bit more, and
Yeah.
specifically when it regards in regards to agencies. What do you see for earnouts?
So, this came up in the Control and Maximize Your Agency Exit. One of our guest experts noted it's often about 50% down. So that's guaranteed. You're
Yeah,
receiving it at closing in cash or wire transfer. It could be, though, 25 to 75% down. The
yeah,
remainder is what's known as an earnout, which is a non-guaranteed portion. It's conditional. There are several conditions that might apply
yeah,
on the valuation. So for instance, say it's valued at 5 million, you might get 2 million down. That's the guaranteed part. And then
yeah,
maybe you're getting, for instance, 1 million a year over 3 years. But that 1 million a year is subject to certain terms. For instance, maybe profits have to be at a certain level. Maybe
yeah,
revenue at a certain level. Maybe you need to retain certain clients. Say if you had a client concentration problem, you
yeah,
could negotiate where maybe you're like, well, if you're like, you think I can keep them for 2 years if I'm involved, maybe you're getting a higher chunk than the seller or than the buyer wants to give you if you make it conditional on retaining the
yeah.
clients.
It's funny because I don't know if you watch NFL, Carl, but last night I was watching an NFL game,
Mhm.
and the at the end of the game, the player, the announcer said that guy just earned $3 million because he passed 1,000 rushing yards for the season, and
Wow.
basically he was on an earnout.
Mhm.
But it was in a sports analogy. But the way you've articulated it is a pretty good description. I will point out you could, if you're an agency owner, any type of owner negotiating, you could have a seller note. It's guaranteed, and it's not
Yes.
based on performance. But the earnout, which a lot of people are calling forgivable seller notes now for
Mm.
SBA purposes, you're not guaranteed to get that money. You have to earn it out. So I think this is
And
something a lot of owners are just not expecting. So it's good to understand these pretty common deal terms. I would imagine they're more common in agency deals than other types of work because it comes down to something that's so intangible.
for sure. And I mean, it's all negotiable. Also, keep in mind that if you've got an earnout, is it contingent on your continuing to work at the
Yeah.
agency?
Yeah.
You may not like having a boss, and maybe may not like having them as your particular boss. So
Yeah.
consider, what is contingent on employment or not.
To me, all this comes back to understanding, doing that planning that you're talking about, understanding what
Yeah.
success looks like for you in an exit so that you can pick your path in advance and know what a
Yes.
successful exit could look like way down the road, and understand all these dynamics about how long it'll take, what the deal structure would be like, what's going to happen with your team. And that's what exit planning is all about, is getting in front of all that stuff before it's right on top of you.
Exactly. Talk to people who've been there before,
Yeah.
and importantly that you've hired to help you, because then
Yeah.
you know that they're on your side. Because likely this is going to be the only exit you do.
Yeah.
Don't just wing it.
Yeah, if you're selling your business a second time, something could have gone horribly wrong. That does happen sometimes. Well,
Yeah.
speaking of hiring great professionals, you've already given a lot of great advice, and you've referenced a few resources, your book, some
Yep.
talks you've done. I understand you've got courses. I want to give
Yeah.
you, we're wrapping up here. I want to give you just a couple moments to share anything you have upcoming, anything you want to plug, and we'll have Ross put in the show notes as well. Carl, tell
Sure.
what you got.
Well, hundreds of free resources at sakasandcompany.com. That's SAKAS, the word company.com, including over 450 blog posts on agency growth, including preparing for an exit. You can also get free resources related to my latest book, Work Less, Earn More. That's at worklessearnmorebook.com. I have a new one coming out as well in 2025. But I mentioned the training, the Control and Maximize Your Agency Exit. It talks all about preparing for a great exit. It's a 6-hour program. It's on demand. You can go at your own pace, different exercises, including an exit plan template. And thanks to our conversation, if you are listening here, you can use a code to save $150. If you use code Raleigh Business Broker at checkout, you'll save on Control and Maximize Your Agency Exit.
Thank you for sharing that with our audiences, Karl. And in addition to all of that, I would encourage you, if you're watching, also sign up for Karl's newsletter. Karl's got a really good newsletter. Get on his email list. I guarantee you'll learn something. And another good resource he didn't even mention. So
great point. More than one agency owner has called my newsletter the only email they read every time. So,
yeah, it's a good email. It's a good email, and that speaks to the type of work that you do. So, all right. Well, anything else you want to wrap up with? I think we've covered some great stuff. I've really enjoyed this conversation, Karl.
Yeah, same here. I mean, I would say for anyone who's listening, running an agency is never going to be easy, but it doesn't have to be so hard. Take advantage of resources, things like we've discussed here, and professionals who are focused in the industry and focused in different specialized areas. You don't have to go it alone. So good luck out there.
Well said. Well, Karl, thank you for joining us in the program, and for everybody watching, thanks for watching. Until next time, Valhalla.